My fiancé's mother clinked her glass. We're so happy Mark is finally marrying someone presentable. Unlike his last choice, what was her name, dear? The one who... My future husband went pale as the caterer dropped a tray. That would be me, Mrs. Blackthorne. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Can't make dinner tonight. Mother needs me. I stared at the message while standing outside the restaurant where I'd been waiting for 45 minutes. This was the third time this month. The waiter kept glancing at my empty table with pity. I typed and deleted 3 different responses. It's okay, I understand. Delete. We need to talk about this pattern. Delete. Your mother or me, Mark? Choose. Delete. Instead, I sent nothing at all and walked home in my new heels that were already giving me blisters. The thing about dating Mark Blackthorne was that everyone knew his name before they knew mine. At coffee shops, the barista would light up when he ordered his usual vanilla latte. Oh my gosh, are you related to the Blackthorne family? The ones who own half the city. I'd stand beside him, invisible, holding my plain black coffee and wishing I could disappear entirely. Before we continue with Olivia's transformation, I want to thank you for joining me. If you believe every woman deserves respect regardless of background, please subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more women. Now let's see how this unfolds. But Mark wasn't the problem. Not really. He'd hold my hand under restaurant tables and whisper jokes that made me snort laugh in the most inappropriate moments. In our tiny studio apartment, he'd dance with me in his boxers while pancakes burned on the stove. He'd trace patterns on my back at night and promise me we'd build something beautiful together, something that belonged just to us. The problem was his mother. Mrs. Victoria Blackthorne didn't just dislike me. She studied me with the focused intensity of a scientist examining a particularly disappointing specimen. During our first meeting, she'd asked about my parents' occupations, my college GPA, and whether I had any family money, with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. When I mentioned my father worked construction and my mother cleaned houses, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. How industrious, she'd said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. After that, Mark started making excuses. Family dinners became business meetings. Holiday gatherings turned into important social events, where +1s weren't appropriate. I found myself spending Christmas Eve alone, watching old movies and eating takeout Chinese food while Mark attended his family's annual charity gala. She just needs time, he'd say whenever I brought up her obvious disdain. Mother's protective of the family reputation. Once she sees how happy you make me, everything will change. But months passed and nothing changed except my growing certainty that I was fighting a losing battle. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Mark had finally convinced his mother to have dinner with both of us at their family estate. I'd spent my entire paycheck on a conservative navy dress and practiced conversation topics in the mirror. I was ready to prove I belonged in their world. Mrs. Blackthorne greeted me at the door wearing pearls that probably cost more than my car. Olivia, dear. How lovely that you could join us. Her tone suggested it wasn't lovely at all. Dinner was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. She asked about my career prospects, my 5-year plan, my thoughts on proper child-rearing techniques. Each question felt designed to highlight everything I lacked. I answered carefully, trying to strike the right balance between confident and humble, ambitious and traditional. Then she delivered the blow that changed everything. Mark tells me you two have been discussing marriage, she said, cutting her filet mignon with surgical precision. How quaint. Of course, you understand that any woman who marries into this family must meet certain standards. Social standing, educational background, family connections. The usual requirements. I felt my face burning. I think I meet those standards, Mrs. Blackthorne. Her laugh was soft and devastating. Oh, my dear girl. You think my son would actually marry someone like you? This little romance is charming, but let's be realistic about expectations. Mark said nothing. He just stared at his plate while his mother continued her character assassination. The Blackthorne name represents something in this city. Tradition. Excellence. Legacy. We can't have that tarnished by unfortunate associations. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Blackthorne. Mark, I'll wait for you outside. But he didn't follow me. I stood on their circular driveway for 20 minutes, listening to muffled voices through the dining room windows. When Mark finally emerged, his face was pale and defeated. "She's right, Olivia. I'm sorry, but she's right. This isn't going to work." Those words echoed in my head for weeks afterward. I moved back in with my roommate, avoided our usual coffee shop, and threw myself into work with desperate intensity. But I couldn't escape the whispers that followed me everywhere. "Isn't that the girl who tried to trap Mark Blackthorne? She actually thought she had a chance with him. Poor thing. Someone should have warned her." The humiliation was suffocating. But somewhere in that darkness something else began to grow. Something cold and calculating and patient. If Victoria Blackthorne thought I wasn't good enough for her world, I'd prove her wrong. Not by begging for acceptance, but by building something so powerful she'd have no choice but to acknowledge my worth. I opened my laptop and began researching Blackthorne Enterprises' competitors. If they wanted to play games about who belonged where, I'd show them how the game was really won. The first thing I did was change my name. Not legally, not yet, but professionally. Olivia Chin became Olivia Vexley, a combination of my grandmother's maiden name and something that sounded like old money. The business cards I ordered were thick, cream-colored stock with embossed lettering. When I handed them out, people assumed I came from somewhere important. Morrison and Associates didn't know what hit them. I arrived at 7 each morning and left after midnight, taking on cases nobody else wanted. The difficult clients, the impossible deadlines, the projects that made senior partners grimace. I said yes to everything. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside after my third consecutive 18-hour day. "Olivia, you're going to burn out if you keep this pace." "I'm fine," I told her, organizing client files that didn't need organizing. "I like staying busy." What I didn't tell her was that staying busy kept me from thinking about Mark's face when he chose his mother over me. Work became my drug and I mainlined it every chance I got. The Blackthorne research consumed my evenings. I subscribed to business journals, financial newsletters, industry gossip columns. I learned their expansion patterns, their acquisition strategies, their board members' voting histories. Mrs. Blackthorne served on the museum board with Patricia Hendricks, whose husband ran the city's largest construction firm. That firm had been underbidding Blackthorne projects for 2 years running. I made a note to remember Patricia's name. 3 months after our breakup, I got promoted to senior associate. 6 months later, I was handling my own client portfolio. The money started flowing in and I moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in the financial district. Nothing fancy, but it had a view of the Blackthorne building's distinctive glass facade. Every morning I'd drink my coffee while staring at those windows, wondering if Mark ever looked out and thought about me. My transformation wasn't just professional. I hired a personal stylist, traded my drugstore makeup for department store brands, and learned to speak with the kind of confident authority that made people lean in when I talked. The girl who used to apologize for taking up space disappeared entirely. At networking events, I became a different person. I'd glide through crowds in designer dresses I couldn't quite afford yet, collecting business cards and dropping carefully crafted hints about my growing client list. The key was listening more than talking, remembering personal details, and following up with handwritten thank you notes. "Olivia Vexley," I'd say, extending my hand with a firm grip. "Such a pleasure to meet you." People remembered the name. More importantly, they remembered the woman who spoke it. The breakthrough came during a charity auction for the Children's Hospital. I'd bought a table, invited clients, and wore a black cocktail dress that had cost more than my first car. Halfway through the evening, I spotted familiar faces across the room. Mark's business partner, David Sterling, was bidding aggressively on a weekend in the Hamptons. His wife stood beside him, dripping in diamonds that caught the ballroom lights. I waited until the auction ended, then approached their table during dessert. "David Sterling," I said, my voice warm with recognition. "Olivia Vexley from Morrison and Associates. We met briefly at the Harbor Club last spring." He squinted, trying to place me, then his face brightened. "Of course. You handled that messy acquisition for the Patterson Group. Brilliant work, if I remember correctly." I hadn't handled that case, but I'd studied it extensively. "You're too kind. I heard through the grapevine that Blackthorne might be looking for outside counsel on their upcoming merger. Such an exciting opportunity." David's expression shifted slightly. "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, you know how these things go. Industry whispers." I sipped my champagne, watching his face carefully. "I'm sure whoever lands that account will do wonderful work." What I'd actually heard was that Blackthorn was hemorrhaging money on legal fees, switching firms every few months when cases went badly. David's tight smile confirmed my suspicion. Industry whispers can be so unreliable, he said. Absolutely. Well, it was lovely seeing you again. I walked away knowing I'd planted the right seed. Within a week, David had called Morrison asking about my availability for a discreet consultation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that had rejected me as unsuitable for their family was now paying my firm's premium rates for my expertise. I sat in their conference room taking notes while David outlined their legal challenges, and felt a satisfaction that was almost intoxicating. My apartment upgraded again, this time to a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows. I furnished it with pieces that screamed success. A white leather sofa, abstract paintings, fresh orchids delivered weekly. When colleagues visited, they'd whistle appreciatively and ask how I afforded such luxury on an associate's salary. Good investments, I'd say mysteriously. The truth was simpler. I lived, breathed, and dreamed about success because it was the only thing that dulled the ache of remembering how small they'd made me feel. Every promotion, every new client, every expensive purchase was another step away from the girl who'd begged for acceptance. Late at night, when the city lights blurred through my windows, I'd sometimes catch my reflection and barely recognize the woman staring back. She was polished, confident, untouchable. She was everything Mrs. Blackthorn had said I could never become. But she was also hollow. The success felt real, but the person achieving it sometimes felt like an elaborate performance. I'd perfected the art of being Olivia Vexley so completely that I wasn't sure Olivia Chin existed anymore. The newspaper article changed everything. Blackthorn Enterprises under investigation for financial irregularities. I read it over morning coffee, my hands steady even as my pulse quickened. The scandal involved offshore accounts, questionable partnerships, and regulatory violations that could cost them millions in fines. I set down my cup and reached for my phone. It was time to make some calls. Within 48 hours, 3 different reporters had contacted me for background information about Blackthorn's business practices. I provided carefully neutral responses, never saying anything directly damaging but asking the kind of pointed questions that made them dig deeper. The feeding frenzy had begun and I was finally ready to feast. Mark's number appeared on my phone screen at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I let it ring 4 times before answering, long enough to sound busy but not dismissive. Olivia. His voice cracked slightly on my name. I know I don't have the right to call, but I need to see you. Please. I set down my wine glass and walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur below. Of course, Mark. I'd love to catch up. The warmth in my voice was perfect, surprised but genuinely pleased. I could hear him exhale with relief. Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me after everything. Water under the bridge, I said softly. We're both adults. How about Thursday at Chez Laurent? 7:30. I chose the restaurant deliberately. It was where he'd taken me for our 6-month anniversary, back when I thought we had a future together. The reservation was hard to get, expensive enough to suggest I was doing well for myself, intimate enough to make him comfortable. Thursday arrived gray and drizzling. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing a burgundy dress that was sophisticated without being flashy. My makeup was flawless but understated. I wanted to look successful, confident, but not like I was trying too hard. Mark was already seated when I arrived, fidgeting with his water glass. He stood when he saw me and for a moment his face showed genuine surprise. You look incredible, Olivia. I smiled and let him pull out my chair. Thank you. You look good too. It wasn't entirely true. He'd lost weight and not in a healthy way. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The golden boy I'd fallen in love with looked diminished somehow. I've been following your career, he said once we'd ordered. Morrison and Associates is lucky to have you. Partner track already from what I hear. The work keeps me busy. I took a small sip of my wine. But I love what I do. There's something satisfying about solving complex problems. He nodded, then stared at his hands. Olivia, I need to apologize. The way things ended between us, it wasn't fair to you. Mark, you don't need to. Yes, I do. He looked up and I saw genuine regret in his eyes. My mother pushed and I should have pushed back. I should have fought for us. I reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. You were protecting your family. I understand that now. The lie came easily. What I understood was that he was weak and weakness could be useful. The thing is, he continued, his voice dropping, we're in trouble. The company, I mean. The scandal hit us harder than we expected. I nodded sympathetically. I saw the news coverage. That must be incredibly stressful. We're hemorrhaging clients. 3 major accounts pulled out last month alone. The board is talking about bringing in outside investors, maybe even selling. I'm so sorry, Mark. Your family's business means everything to you. He leaned forward and I could smell the desperation coming off him in waves. That's actually why I called. I know this sounds crazy, but we need someone with capital. Someone with a clean reputation who understands our industry. I tilted my head, curious but not eager. What are you thinking? Your client portfolio at Morrison is impressive. Some of those companies have serious investment capital. And your personal success. He gestured around the expensive restaurant. You've clearly done well for yourself. I've been fortunate, I said modestly. Would you consider investing? In Blackthorn Enterprises, I mean. We'd offer you significant returns, board representation, whatever you'd need to make it worthwhile. I set down my fork and looked at him carefully. Mark, are you asking me to save your family's company? His face flushed. I know how it sounds. But you're the smartest person I know when it comes to business. And despite everything that happened between us, I trust you. The irony was delicious. I let silence stretch between us, watching him squirm. I'd need to see the books, I said finally. Complete financial disclosure. And I'd want to meet with your board directly. Of course. Absolutely. I can arrange that. And Mark. I looked directly into his eyes. If I do this, I'm not doing it as your ex-girlfriend. I'm doing it as a businesswoman. My personal feelings can't factor into investment decisions. He nodded eagerly. I understand completely. The first board meeting was scheduled for the following week in Blackthorn's mahogany-paneled conference room. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mrs. Blackthorn was already there, holding court with 3 elderly men in expensive ties. She turned when I entered, and for a split second, I saw confusion flicker across her face. She knew she recognized me but couldn't quite place where. Mrs. Blackthorn, I said, extending my hand with a confident smile. Olivia Vexley. Such a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Her handshake was firm, her smile automatic. Miss Vexley. Mark speaks so highly of your business acumen. He's very kind. I understand you're looking for strategic investment partners. What followed was 2 hours of financial presentations, market analysis, and carefully orchestrated charm. I asked the right questions, showed just enough concern to seem thorough, and gradually positioned myself as their potential savior. Mrs. Blackthorn was particularly attentive, commenting on my sophisticated understanding of market dynamics, and my refreshingly direct communication style. She had no idea she was praising the same girl she'd dismissed as unsuitable breeding stock 2 years earlier. Your proposal is quite generous, I said as the meeting wound down. But I'd need certain assurances before committing this level of capital. What kind of assurances? David Sterling asked. I opened my leather portfolio and pulled out a typed list. Standard investor protections mostly. Board oversight, quarterly reporting requirements, strategic input on major decisions. I paused, scanning the document. And given the personal nature of my relationship with Mark, I'd need some guarantee of long-term stability. Mrs. Blackthorn leaned forward. What do you mean? Well, if Mark and I were to marry, it would create additional stakeholder alignment. My investment would become a family investment, which provides certain legal protections that benefit everyone. The room went quiet. Mark's eyes widened, but I could see him processing the logic. You're suggesting marriage as a business arrangement? Mrs. Blackthorn asked. I'm suggesting that marriages between business partners often create stronger, more stable partnerships, I replied calmly. It's not uncommon in family-owned enterprises. I watched her weigh the options. $20 million in desperately needed capital versus her personal dislike of me. Money won. That's actually quite practical, she said slowly. The contract negotiations took 3 weeks. I insisted on reviewing every clause, every contingency, every possible loophole. My lawyers earned their fees, but they didn't know about the one clause I wrote myself and slipped into the final draft at the last minute. Section 47B, buried on page 36 between insurance requirements and audit procedures. Investment agreement contingent upon marriage ceremony between primary investor Vexley and company heir Blackthorne, within 60 days of contract execution. Mrs. Blackthorne signed without reading past page 10. Mark signed because his mother told him to. The board members signed because they wanted their company saved. I signed because I just bought myself a front row seat to their destruction. The first headline appeared in the Business Tribune 3 days after the contracts were signed: Blackthorne heir to wed mystery executive Olivia Vexley. By noon, 6 more publications had picked up the story. The financial blogs called it a strategic alliance, while the society pages speculated about my background with barely concealed hunger. I sat in my office, reading each article with clinical detachment. Mystery executive was their favorite phrase. None of them had connected Olivia Vexley to the girl Mark had dated 2 years ago. My transformation was so complete that even investigative journalists couldn't see past the designer suits and corporate credentials. Mark called that afternoon, his voice tight with stress. The media attention is getting intense. Mother thinks we should have the wedding planner issue a statement. What kind of statement? I asked, though I already knew. Something about keeping the ceremony private. Family only. You know how she feels about publicity. I smiled, watching my reflection in my office window. Actually, Mark, I think we should embrace the attention. This is good for the company's image. Shows stability, confidence in the future. There was silence on the other end. You want a big wedding? I want the right wedding. The kind that sends a message to your investors and competitors alike. 3 days later, Mrs. Blackthorne called me directly. Her voice was honey-sweet, but I could hear the steel underneath. Olivia, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation with Mark. Perhaps a larger celebration would be appropriate after all. Something that reflects the family's status. I'm so glad you agree, Mrs. Blackthorne. I was hoping you'd help me plan it. Your taste is legendary. The flattery worked perfectly. Within a week, she'd taken over the entire production, treating it like a military campaign. The venue she chose was the Meridian Club, an exclusive downtown location where presidents had held fundraisers and oil barons had celebrated mergers. The guest list grew to 300 of the city's most influential people. I played my role perfectly, appearing grateful for her guidance while quietly inserting my own requirements. The flowers had to be white orchids imported from Thailand. The menu needed to include certain dishes. The seating arrangement required my careful approval. You have such sophisticated preferences, Mrs. Blackthorne told me during one of our planning sessions. Where did you develop such refined taste? My grandmother, I lied smoothly. She always said presentation was everything in business. The dress shopping trip was particularly satisfying. Mrs. Blackthorne insisted on accompanying me to her personal stylist at Bergdorf Goodman, where dresses started at $10,000. The staff treated her like royalty, bringing champagne and offering private consultation rooms. This is the one, she declared when I emerged in a silk creation that looked like liquid moonlight. Absolutely perfect. You look like you were born to wear couture. I turned slowly in front of the 3-way mirror, watching her face in the reflection. Her eyes held the same approval she'd once reserved for Mark's Princeton diploma and his trust fund statements. It's beautiful, I agreed. But perhaps we should look at a few more options? Nonsense. This dress was made for you. She insisted on paying for it herself, along with the veil, the shoes, and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. Each purchase was another chain binding me to the family, another investment in the fantasy that I belonged in their world. The bridal shower was held at Mrs. Blackthorne's estate, attended by 40 women who'd never spoken to me before the engagement announcement. They air-kissed my cheeks and complimented my ring, asking carefully neutral questions about my family and background. Olivia's people are from the West Coast, Mrs. Blackthorne would explain when someone pushed too hard. Very private family. Old money, you know how discreet they can be. I nodded along, playing the mysterious heiress to perfection. Let them imagine trust funds and family compounds. The truth was so much more interesting. Mark grew increasingly nervous as the wedding approached. During our final dress rehearsal, he pulled me aside in the church vestibule. "Are you sure about this, Olivia? Once we do this, there's no going back." I adjusted his tie, letting my fingers linger on his chest. "Cold feet, darling? It's not that. It's just, this all happened so fast. The business deal, the engagement, the wedding. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching someone else's life." "Everything worthwhile happens fast," I told him. "Besides, your mother is thrilled. Look how happy she is." We both glanced toward the sanctuary, where Mrs. Blackthorne was directing the florists with military precision. She wore a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her smile was radiant. "She does seem pleased," Mark admitted. "She loves me now," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Mrs. Blackthorne did love the version of me she'd created in her head. The cultured, wealthy woman who would elevate her son's status and secure the family's financial future. That night, I stood alone in the bridal suite of the city's most expensive hotel. The dress hung in the closet, still in its protective bag. My shoes were arranged neatly by the door. The veil, with its intricate beadwork and 15-foot train, was spread across an armchair like a ghost. The mirror showed me a woman I barely recognized. My skin glowed from expensive facials, my hair was styled in an elegant updo that had taken 2 hours to perfect, and my nails were painted the exact shade of blush pink Mrs. Blackthorne had chosen for the reception flowers. I looked like everything they'd said I could never be. Refined, sophisticated, worthy. My phone buzzed with a text from my former roommate Sarah. "Saw the announcement in the paper. Can't believe you're marrying that guy after what his family put you through. Are you okay?" I deleted the message without responding. Sarah belonged to a different life, one where I'd been vulnerable and hopeful and naive enough to believe love conquered all. That girl was gone. Tomorrow's guest list read like a directory of power. Senators, judges, media moguls, oil executives. Half the state's political establishment would be watching me walk down the aisle. The other half would be reading about it in Sunday's society pages. None of them would see Olivia Chin, the accountant's daughter who'd been deemed unworthy of their world. They'd see Olivia Vexley, the mysterious investor who'd rescued a failing dynasty and married into American aristocracy. I poured myself a glass of champagne from the bottle Mrs. Blackthorne had sent up with her compliments. The bubbles tickled my throat as I raised the glass to my reflection. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the stranger in the mirror, "they'll finally meet the real me." The city lights twinkled outside my window, and somewhere in that glittering maze, the Blackthorne family slept peacefully, dreaming of their triumphant tomorrow. They had no idea that their salvation was actually their reckoning, gift wrapped in silk and promises. The morning arrived with picture-perfect spring sunshine streaming through the cathedral's stained glass windows. I woke to the sound of florists arranging thousands of white orchids in the sanctuary below my hotel suite. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, exactly as I'd imagined it would. My bridal party arrived at 8 sharp. Mrs. Blackthorne had insisted on hiring professional hair and makeup artists, women who regularly worked with celebrities and society wives. They transformed me into a vision of bridal perfection, painting my face with subtle glamour and weaving tiny pearls through my elaborate updo. "You look absolutely radiant," gushed Penelope Worthington, Mrs. Blackthorne's closest friend and my designated matron of honor. She'd known me for exactly 6 weeks but spoke as if we'd been childhood companions. Victoria must be beside herself with joy. Through the window I could see guests arriving in luxury cars and limousines. Senators stepped out of black town cars while media moguls emerged from vintage Rolls-Royces. The parking area looked like a showcase of American wealth and power. Mrs. Blackthorne swept into my suite at noon, wearing a champagne-colored dress that complemented my gown perfectly. Her eyes misted when she saw me in the full regalia. "Oh darling, you're absolutely perfect." She fastened her grandmother's pearl necklace around my throat with trembling fingers. "Welcome to the family, truly." I squeezed her hands, feeling the expensive rings she wore on every finger. "Thank you for accepting me, Mrs. Blackthorne. This means everything." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but my voice remained steady and warm. The limousine ride to the cathedral took 12 minutes. Mrs. Blackthorne held my hand the entire way, pointing out guests she recognized on the sidewalk and sharing stories about the cathedral's history. Her nervous chatter revealed how much this wedding meant to her social standing. Senator Morrison is here and the Pemberton family. Oh, and there's Judge Blackwell with his wife. This is exactly the kind of wedding that shows everyone the Blackthorne name still commands respect. I nodded along, watching the crowd through tinted windows. 300 of the city's most influential people had gathered to witness what they believed would be my transformation from successful businesswoman to Blackthorne family member. The cathedral doors opened and organ music swelled through the space. My heart rate accelerated, but not from bridal nerves. This was the exhilaration of a perfectly executed plan reaching its climax. Mark waited at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, flanked by 6 groomsmen who represented old money, political connections, and business dynasties. His face showed relief when he saw me appear at the cathedral's entrance. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The walk down the aisle felt eternal and instantaneous simultaneously. Every step carried me past faces I'd studied in business magazines and society columns. These were the people who'd dismissed me as unsuitable, who'd whispered about my failed relationship with Mark, who'd never bothered to learn my real name. Judge Pemberton, Mrs. Blackthorne's longtime friend, officiated the ceremony. His voice echoed through the cathedral as he spoke about marriage, commitment, and the joining of 2 families. The irony was delicious. If anyone has any reason why these 2 should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional words hung in the air. This was usually just ceremonial, a formality that passed without incident. But I felt my pulse quicken. This was my moment. Judge Pemberton smiled at the silence and continued. Mark, please take Olivia's hand. Mark reached toward me, his fingers warm and slightly trembling. The moment our skin touched, time seemed to slow. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching us. But instead of placing my hand in his, I stepped back. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics, there is something I need to say first. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Mark's face went pale, his hand still extended toward me. Olivia, he whispered. What are you doing? I turned to face the assembled guests, my voice projecting with the confidence I'd spent 2 years perfecting. Before we continue, there's something you all should know about the woman you're watching today. The murmur that started in the front pews spread backward like a wave. Mrs. Blackthorne's face showed alarm, then confusion, then something approaching panic. I gestured toward the projection screen that had been set up for our reception slideshow. My assistant, positioned in the balcony as planned, activated the equipment. The image appeared in crisp, undeniable detail. Me 3 years ago standing outside Mark's office building in a discount dress and drugstore makeup, holding a small gift bag and looking hopeful. This was me, I said, my voice cutting through the shocked silence. 3 years ago. The woman Mrs. Blackthorne called a gold digger. The one she said wasn't presentable enough for her family. The girl she swore would never ever marry her son. The gasps started in the front row and spread through the cathedral like wildfire. I watched Mrs. Blackthorne's face drain of color as recognition finally dawned. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You see, I continued, Mrs. Blackthorne was right about one thing. That girl wasn't good enough for your family. But she was smart enough to become someone who could destroy it. Mark stepped toward me, his voice breaking. Olivia, please. Don't do this. Whatever you're angry about, we can fix it. We can. I raised my hand and he stopped mid-sentence. The power in that simple gesture was intoxicating. Your empire's gone, Mark. My investment firm now owns controlling interest in your company's debt. The contracts you signed so eagerly last month? They contained more than just marriage clauses. I pulled a folded document from my bouquet, where I'd hidden it among the orchid stems. Your board voted unanimously to accept my buyout offer yesterday. They were very impressed with my business plan for restructuring Blackthorne Enterprises. The cathedral was completely silent now. Even the organist had stopped playing. Mrs. Blackthorne, I said, turning to face the woman who'd shaped my transformation, you once told me I wasn't presentable enough for your world. Today, I'm here to tell you that your world wasn't worthy enough for me. I handed Judge Pemberton the document, my voice clear and final. The wedding is off. Judge Pemberton stared at the document in his hands, his face ashen. The cathedral had fallen into complete silence, the kind that feels heavy and suffocating. 300 of the city's most powerful people sat frozen in their pews, champagne flutes suspended halfway to their lips, pearls catching the colored light from stained glass windows. I could hear my own heartbeat, the rustle of my silk dress, the distant sound of traffic outside. Mrs. Blackthorne stood beside the altar like a statue, her mouth slightly open, one hand pressed against her throat where my borrowed pearl necklace had been just hours earlier. "Olivia," Mark's voice cracked across the silence. "Please, don't do this. We can work something out. Whatever you want, whatever you need." I turned to look at him one final time. He looked smaller somehow, diminished in his expensive tuxedo. The golden boy who'd once made me believe in fairy tales now stood before me begging for mercy I had no intention of giving. "What I wanted," I said quietly, "was for your mother to see me as worthy of basic human respect. What I needed was for you to choose me over her approval just once. You had your chance, Mark. You chose poorly." I lifted the heavy train of my wedding dress and turned my back on the altar, on the family, on the life they'd convinced me I should want. The walk back down the aisle felt different this time. Each step was deliberate, powerful, final. The guests turned their heads as I passed, their faces showing everything from shock to admiration to barely concealed glee. Senator Morrison's wife actually smiled at me, a tiny nod of approval that suggested she'd witnessed similar family dramas in her own circles. Judge Blackwell's daughter raised her champagne glass in a subtle toast. At the back of the cathedral, I paused at the holy water font where an enormous arrangement of white orchids created a fragrant backdrop. Without ceremony, I pulled the $15,000 bouquet apart, letting the imported Thai orchids scatter across the marble floor. The sound of expensive petals hitting stone felt like punctuation marks at the end of a very long sentence. Mrs. Blackthorne's voice finally found itself, echoing off the cathedral walls. "Stop her. Someone stop her. This is insane." But no one moved. The city's power brokers, political elite, and social aristocracy sat in their pews watching my exit with the fascination of people witnessing history. This wasn't just a cancelled wedding. This was the public execution of a dynasty, performed by someone they'd all underestimated. The cathedral doors opened to reveal a perfect spring afternoon. My driver, Thomas, stood beside the vintage Rolls-Royce I'd hired for the occasion. His face remained professionally neutral, but I caught the hint of a smile when he saw me emerge alone. "Change of plans, Thomas," I said, gathering my dress to step into the car. "We won't be going to the reception." "Of course, Miss Vexley. Where would you like to go?" I settled into the leather seat, feeling the weight of the day lift from my shoulders. "Home. And Thomas? Stop at that little flower shop on 5th Street. As we pulled away from the cathedral, I could see the chaos beginning through the rear window. Guests were streaming out of the building, cell phones already pressed to their ears. Mrs. Blackthorne stood on the steps, gesticulating wildly while Mark tried to calm her down. The scene looked like something from a disaster movie. At the flower shop, I purchased a simple bunch of daisies for $12. The elderly florist recognized me from the morning news coverage and tried to refuse payment. "Please," she said, pressing the flowers into my hands. "After what you just did, these are on the house." Back in my penthouse, I changed out of the wedding dress and hung it in the back of my closet, still in its pristine condition. It would serve as a reminder of how completely I'd transformed myself, how thoroughly I'd infiltrated their world. The first news alert appeared on my phone at 4:17 p.m. Blackthorne wedding called off in dramatic cathedral confrontation. By evening, the story had been picked up by national outlets. The photos they used showed me walking away from the altar, my face serene and determined. The calls started immediately. Reporters, business colleagues, former friends who'd crawled out of the woodwork hoping for inside information. I ignored them all, letting my phone buzz uselessly on the kitchen counter while I opened a bottle of champagne that had been chilling for 2 years. Mark's first text arrived at sunset. "Olivia, please call me. We need to talk. I can fix this." His second came an hour later. "My mother is devastated. The family is in shambles. Is this really what you wanted?" The third, sent near midnight, was different. "I deserve this. I know I do. But please just tell me it's over. Tell me you're done." I read each message, then deleted them without responding. He still didn't understand. This had never been about him. My laptop chimed with email notifications throughout the evening. Business Week wanted an exclusive interview. The Wall Street Journal was preparing a profile on my investment strategy. 3 different literary agents had reached out about book deals. But the message that made me smile came from an unexpected source. Patricia Hendricks, Mrs. Blackthorne's former friend from the museum board. Olivia, darling. What a performance today. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to put Victoria in her place. Lunch next week? I have some business propositions that might interest you. I poured myself another glass of champagne and walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below me, its lights twinkling like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, the Blackthorne family was probably in crisis mode, trying to figure out how to salvage their reputation and their business. Tomorrow, the financial markets would open to news of their family drama. Stock prices would fluctuate. Board meetings would be called. Damage control specialists would be hired. But tonight, I stood in my penthouse wearing silk pajamas that cost more than my first apartment's rent, drinking champagne that was older than my relationship with Mark, and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Mark. I loved you. I still love you. Doesn't that count for anything? I set the phone aside without reading the rest. Love had never been the point. Respect was the currency I'd been after, and I'd finally collected payment in full. The city lights blurred slightly as I raised my glass to the window. Some brides get happily ever after, I whispered to my reflection. I got something better. I got even. But as I stood there, surrounded by the symbols of my success, I realized something had shifted. The girl who'd started this journey had wanted acceptance. The woman who'd finished it had discovered something far more valuable, the knowledge that she didn't need their approval to build an empire. Mrs. Blackthorne had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one. I wasn't the same person who'd walked into their world 3 years ago. I was better. If this story of ultimate revenge had you cheering for Olivia, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she revealed that old photo at the altar, watching Mrs. Blackthorne's face drain of color. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.